The Man Who Escaped Ritual Sacrifice. The true story of Chijioke's nightmare. This is a true life story from Nigeria about a man who was kidnapped for ritual sacrifice but escaped in a way that can only be described as supernatural. Chijioke had just finished a long day at the market and was heading home. The streets were dark and he was in a hurry. His wife had just given birth to their second child and he couldn't wait to see them. As he walked down a quiet road, an elderly woman stopped him and begged for help. She claimed she was lost and needed directions. Chijioke, being the good man he was, agreed to help her find her way. That was the last thing he remembered. Captured by the ritualists, when Chijioke woke up, he was inside a dark, smelly room. His hands and feet were bound with ropes and his mouth was gagged. Around him were other captives, men and women, all looking terrified. The walls were covered in dried blood, strange symbols, and juju charms. In one corner of the room there was a large black pot, bubbling with something foul-smelling inside it. Then the reality hit him. He had been kidnapped by ritualists. These were people who believed that sacrificing humans could bring them wealth, power, and protection from spiritual enemies. Chijioke had heard stories about this before, but he never imagined he would become a victim himself. The evil ritual begins. A few hours later, a man dressed in red robes entered the room. He was the chief priest, and he carried a long knife covered in fresh blood. The priest began examining each captive, muttering incantations under his breath. He was choosing who would be sacrificed first. Chijioke watched in horror as a young woman was dragged away, screaming. Moments later, the room was filled with the sound of drums, chanting, and her blood-curdling screams. The mysterious old woman appears. As Chijioke sat there, shaking in fear, something strange happened. The same old woman who had asked for his help earlier appeared in the ritual chamber. But now she looked different. Her body glowed faintly, and her eyes were piercing and full of power. She walked straight up to the chief priest and said, "This one is not for you. Let him go." The entire room froze. The priest looked terrified, as if he had seen a ghost. The other ritualists immediately fell to their knees, bowing before the old woman. They began to chant, "We did not know, Great One. Forgive us." Chijioke was confused. Who was this woman? Why were these dangerous men afraid of her? But before he could say anything, the old woman turned to him and whispered, "Run! The Great Escape." Without thinking, Chijioke jumped up and ran. The ropes that had tied his hands and feet had somehow loosened. He ran through the dark corridors of the shrine, hearing the sounds of screaming, wailing, and the beating of drums behind him. As he reached the exit, he saw a deep, snake-infested river blocking his way. The ritualists were now chasing after him, shouting spells and curses. In that moment, Chijioke heard the old woman's voice in his head. "Do not fear. Walk on the water." The ritualists reached the riverbank, but they could not cross. They stood there screaming in rage as Chijioke vanished into the night. Hours later, Chijioke found himself back in Onitsha, in front of his house. His wife opened the door and gasped. He was covered in scratches, dirt, and dried blood. She had been praying for his safe return all night. When he told her what had happened, she began to cry and told him, "Chijioke, the old woman you described, she looks exactly like your late grandmother." Chijioke froze. His grandmother had died 10 years earlier, yet she had appeared and saved him from certain death. From that day on, Chijioke became a different man. He gave up trading and dedicated his life to helping others. He spent years warning people about the ritual kidnappings, saving many from the same fate. The shrine where he was held was later burned down by the authorities, but none of the ritualists were ever caught. To this day, no one knows who the old woman really was. Was she truly his grandmother's spirit, an angel, or a powerful juju priestess protecting her grandson? Whatever the truth may be, one thing is certain. Chijioke Okafor should have died that night. But fate had other plans.